We're living in a time of alertness where people are very focused on sustainability and on the environment.
Consumers are looking at packaging because it affects the environment, but it's also a health issue.
What's in the ground and what's in the environment, what's in the air. We can test for parts per trillion.
What can I do on my consumer side to help the earth as well?
Welcome, everyone. We are delighted you can join us for what will be an absolutely fascinating discussion on important topics inspired by our leading DLA Piper lawyers' experience in the food and beverage space. Here with us is Stephanie Fogel, DLA Piper's Global Chair of the Consumer Goods Food and Retail Sector and co-chair of the FDA Regulatory Practice Group. She's joined by her U.S. Food and Beverage Sector co-chair, Angela Agrusa, who also serves as chair of DLA Piper's commercial litigation practice. With them are Maggie Craig, partner in DLA Piper's Boston office and a leading food regulatory lawyer with a degree in nutrition and food studies, and Tammany Benz, a partner at DLA Piper focusing on helping clients with advertising and intellectual property issues. Today, we'll discuss food and beverage trends and developments around environment, social, and governance. So I'm curious, what ESG issues are food makers focusing on?
So consumers generally, and specifically I think in the foods and beverage space, are interested in clean living, in animal welfare, and in access to environmentally friendly agricultural products. The ESG, the environment, social, and governance aspects of those three consumer demands is really what's driving some of the current legal issues that our clients are facing and that we're, as a organization, really focused on. And by the way, when I say organization, DLA Piper has a number of lawyers, not just the four of us, that are heavily involved in these issues. It's a multidiscipline problem or series of problems that we're just touching the tip of the iceberg on today. Tammany, one of the things we talk about is the issue of packaging and the focus right now that we're seeing from consumers and nonprofits and even regulators on that issue.
You see it develop in how consumers are looking at packaging. They're really interested in the packaging of their food products because it affects the environment, but it's also a health issue. So looking at, for example, organofluorines, which we call PFAS, consumers are starting to look at what's in their packaging. PFAS are used as an anti-grease chemical in wrappers for food, in takeout containers for food, and consumers are starting to focus on them, and we're seeing more legislation in the area looking at PFAS and their levels in food packaging.
And I think it's important to make the point that with some of these issues like PFAS, they have been around for a long time, and they haven't been demanded by the federal government to be removed from the way that we manufacture or the products that we use. But now that we're living in a time of alertness where people are very focused on sustainability and on the environment, they're focused on things like PFAS because they have a longevity and they exist in the soil and in the ground for a long time, and they can impact the environment. It's still a significant question in terms of the impact that they might have on health, but to the extent that we are, as a society, really focused on trying to be better for the planet, the issue with PFAS are really about to the extent to which there are claims made that these things don't matter, or that we are a company, as an example, all about sustainability. We see a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers and legislatures and civil advocates taking a strong stance against those types of statements.
But the FDA allows PFAS in certain categories of things like nonstick cookware, for example. And even though there have been some requests to the FDA that they issue some stronger stance on PFAS, so far they have not been willing to.
And when we do see challenges that come through in the litigation front, we're not seeing it as to health necessarily at this point, right? What we're seeing is challenges to statements in advertising or on a label that might say something like, we are environmentally friendly, or we are sustainable, something around those types of green claims, for a lack of a better term. And then the allegation behind that is, well, you can't be if you have PFAS in your product, which, who knows where this litigation is going to go, right? I mean, we don't have health experts, as far as I'm aware of, right, that's saying this is a health issue at this point in litigation.
I don't even think the testing is at that point, right? The testing is not at a point where you could conclusively say that it is that type of issue. But you're right, you're seeing a lot of the litigation falling under consumer protection statutes and things about how statements may be misleading consumers about how environmentally friendly certain packaging is.
Yeah, I wanted to make the point, too, with respect to your comment on testing, in that, again, with this super focus on sustainability and what's in the ground and what's in the environment, what's in the air, the testing has come to a point where we can test for parts per trillion of certain elements. And in most labs, your average lab, that's a non-detectable limit. So what we're now expecting in terms of raising the bar, and what now we see the legislatures and consumers and being demanded by the government and EPA, is something that's going to take a lot of investment in to even know when it's there and how extensive it's there.
Thank you for that synopsis. I wasn't really familiar with what PFAS were. Moving on to plastics, how does that play into environmental concerns and even into recycling?
Coming from the PFAS discussion, it's important to think about where change comes from when it relates to ESG issues specifically, but also more broadly, our industry. It comes from primarily 5 different areas. Change is inspired by a federal regulator taking a position, issuing an ordinance or a regulation about what is a safe limit or is not a safe limit. It comes from state and local legislators who take control on a local level about what is going to be deemed safe for that particular community. But it comes about also from companies themselves, internal standards, initiatives that they join on a local level, a statewide level, even a global level, and steps they want to take in the environmental, social, and governance stage. And then it happens at impact litigation. Impact litigation is when litigation is used to drive change. People believe the legislature is not acting fast enough, so they file these pieces of litigation that truly are to inspire that kind of change. And I think the last way we see change is when it happens on a global level. And companies are now part of a global initiative or initiatives to inspire change. And this, I think, is particularly true in the area of plastics. By the way, with respect to PFAS, a lot of the current attention on PFAS came about when a Consumer Reports article identified some 120 companies who they went out and tested their packaging and found what they believed to be higher level than appropriate of PFAS. Here, we're seeing that exact same thing in plastics. We see Consumer Reports coming out. We see articles being written about holding companies accountable, companies now, for the plastics that they put into the marketplace. And because there is no science behind saying plastics are bad for humans, they talk about it in terms of more advertising injury claims. You say you care about sustainability. You say that your company is interested in doing good, but yet you're producing a product that is, in their view, polluting the environment. Also, they're taking issue with recyclability claims. You have a claim on your packaging that your product is recyclable. In fact, we don't think there are enough recycling facilities in the United States to actually recycle everything that you're producing. Those issues are critically important right now because to some extent they're right. There is not enough recycling facilities in the United States, but that is not a corporate responsibility. That is a much broader responsibility for our local and state and federal governments to help subsidize and support recyclability to reduce plastic waste. So the issues are incredibly important, but they are a shared issue among a number of stakeholders in our society at the moment. And one thing I want to talk about too, when we talk about regulation, local and state, a lot of this comes down to single-use plastic, right? The bottles that we drink water from, or cartons that we buy yogurt from, or that we buy milk from. Those are some of the issues. And states and local governments are really taking action today about limiting single-use plastics. I don't know, Steph and Maggie, you've been following the legislation and the local ordinances around that issue.
I mean, I think that issue is like a number of the things that we have talked about. It's a global issue, it's a U.S. issue, and it's a state issue, and it's an ordinance issue. So the challenge that our clients and companies really have is, how do they manage all of those inconsistent components, and what is the most consistent common denominator that I can follow in order to comply? Because you ultimately end up having to look at, I don't know, 30 different laws in the state of California, because there might be different requirements in different jurisdictions. So to the extent that this really is a global concern, and the idea of being able to address all of that at one time, and to marshal all of those different pieces of thought leadership, motivation, desire, passion, to do all of that together, I think is something that needs to be a very thoughtful, strategic process for companies who might be smaller and just in a few states, or companies that are global.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. If this is now relegated, there's no federal standard here, so this is really governed on a local level. You are literally looking at municipalities that have these rules. You're looking at states that have these rules. No company, I can imagine, can really keep up with this evolving set of regulations. I think about California, for example. Probably no surprise to a lot of people watching this video, California really is leading the way with initiatives around limiting single-use plastics, requiring compostability, and right now they have an initiative that is in effect today. 15% of plastics produced have to come from post-recycled materials, right? By 2030, they're expecting it to be 50%, which is a lot. Now, state of Washington is right behind California, about to issue the same sort of provision, and they're expanding it even. They're going to include plastic bags. So this is really an important time to be following it, but it's also really difficult for companies to stay on top of it, particularly when they're distributed into, you know, every city and every state in the United States.
There's also another positive side to this, in that what we are talking about now constantly is innovation. So the idea that something like plastics or plastic bags or products containing PFAS need to make their way out of the stream of commerce really allows some true innovators to emerge, who are using different kinds of products and developing different kinds of bottles, packaging, delivery systems, reusable delivery systems. And I think it's only in times like this where we really get the best minds to think about things like this, particularly where it is a need and a demand by consumers, which in turn results in a demand by the providers of products. So it makes its way around.
And we know consumers care, right? I mean, consumers are looking at some of these claims and some of these issues, and they're wanting to buy products that are claiming to be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, more, what can I do on my consumer side to help the earth as well? I mean, we see that helping manufacturers become a little bit more innovative. So while there also is this kind of stringency and scrutiny around it, it certainly is, consumers are demanding it. And as we know, consumers want what they want.
But that consumer demand almost is putting a more heightened focus on our clients and what they say, right? What they say about the packaging, what they say about its recyclability, what they say about all of the processes that go into it and what happens at the end of the day, because consumers are really looking at that.
And what we're also seeing there too, right, is what some of those terms, some of those claims are not necessarily defined. And so then they're putting these on the package, but what does that mean? And how is that being challenged on the litigation front?
And that's what this litigation really is. It's consumer false labeling litigation. They're saying you're just not representing to the public truly what they can do with their plastic. But you talked about the FDA, we talked about a little bit about state and local, and we talked about marketing and advertising, FTC, right? The FTC has something called the Green Guides that gives guidance to companies in how they advertise about their various environmental initiatives and statements, and it hasn't been updated since 2012. Right now, there is active work being done by the FTC, and hopefully they will be issuing this year an update to the Green Guides. And I think that will be very helpful to businesses who are looking for guidance from other than impact litigation, so that they can be assured that what they're doing is transparent and it is in accordance with what the courts and the government requests.
And the Green Guides have a lot of specific examples, but again, they haven't been updated since 2012. So some of those examples don't account for things that are modern day advances in packaging and food products.
Steph, you were talking about innovation. Can you give us some specific examples about what you mean related to innovation?
Absolutely. What I mean specifically with respect to the development of new products in this space that would replace or supplant plastics would be a number of different things. The first would be developing and using a kind of plastic that really is a single type of plastic that actually is more capable of being recycled than products that have different kinds of plastics that are involved, because that can be a real problem in terms of the actual recyclability of a product. So to be more consistent in terms of the type of plastic that you're using that can be recycled. Another option is to start using smaller packaging. I think that we as Americans like big things, and it's something that we need to learn to step away from a little bit. And there really is no need for the amount of packaging that we have on occasion. So to sort of get back to basics and to avoid that unnecessary type of packaging is a really important way to, I think, eliminate the problem. And another way would be to use different types of packaging. So we're using glass bottles now again that we hadn't used before. We're going back to aluminum. We're using different kinds of Tetra packing that will allow things to stay longer on the shelf and will be more easily recyclable. So there's a number of different innovations in the space, and I think all of them are going to contribute to and be very important to our reaching the goals that we're all going to have as a society moving forward. The government could have a significant impact as where they can hold product hostage.
Where is that certification coming from and what does that mean? What's in your supply chain? Who's operating it?
Everything that we eat from the ground or on trees has some exposure to these types of elements.
Now there's even more awareness that there are things in what we eat. There might be an expectation that we test for more than maybe we used to.